Hello, this is Christian Okoye, former Kansas City Chiefs. You are listening to Grilling Truth.
Welcome to the Grilling Truth NFL Legends Show, brought to you by Gridiron Mo, a new interactive football app where you get to call what you think the offense or defense should do during a live NFL game and see what all other fans have called also. Check out Gridiron Mo at www.gridironmo.com. As always, I'm your host for the Legends Show, Mike Goodpaster. We have a very special guest today, All-American offensive lineman at UCLA, helped lead UCLA to one of the great upsets in Rose Bowl history in 1976 over Ohio State. Then went on to win 3 Super Bowls with the San Francisco 49ers. Help me welcome to the show, Randy Cross.
Hey, how you doing?
All right. Pleasure to have you on, even though I'm a Cincinnati Bengals fan. We'll just have to get that out of the way right away. So
it's the least we could do for you.
Well, you helped to ruin my childhood, Randy.
I've heard that a few times from people from the state of Ohio.
Yeah, but what the hell? I guess you had to be drafted by the wrong team. Well, who am I kidding? The Bengals are never the right team to be drafted by. Especially in the mid-1970s.
Well, I almost got drafted by the Browns. Is that close?
Oh, that might even be worse, Randy. I'm not sure. So, a lot of discussions anymore about the concussion, stuff like that, especially people, moms that are freaked out about their sons playing youth football. What age did you start playing football?
I didn't start till the 9th grade. So I'm a little bit different than, I guess the traditional player that, started at a really young age, and so many have in places like Texas and Pennsylvania and Ohio and Michigan and, other places. But baseball was my thing. I loved baseball. And
what position did you play?
I was a pitcher and a catcher. So I could throw it hard to the plate and hard to second base, so it came in handy.
Well, I also saw that you still hold some shot put records at your old high school too.
Yeah. I won the state out there in California. I was a number 2 guy in the country my senior year in high school. Actually, when I was getting recruited, most of the schools were willing to recruit me both ways as far as track and football, which is a little tricky because, by the time of the year that track season hits, that's prime spring football time.
Yeah. Now, what made you choose UCLA? The head coach at UCLA when you got recruited there was still Pepper Rogers, wasn't it?
Yeah, he was my head coach the first 2 years. It was a dual thing. Jim Bush was the head coach of the track team. Had a field event coached by the name of Tom Tellez. So, it was really appealing to the fact that I could go and, play football and then also throw the shot put and do both at UCLA. They had no problem with that. UCLA and Texas were the 2 schools that I got recruited by that, pretty much from the jump said, we have no problem with you doing both.
Now, was there any was there any thoughts about trying to make the Olympic team?
That was my dream. Growing up, when I hit the shot put, started that in the 9th grade. That was in, 1968. So, Olympics were a long way off. But by the time, the guy that I beat for the state my senior year by the name of Terry Albritton would go on to hold the world record. I think just about around his senior year or so at Stanford or soon thereafter, so 76, 77. And he, like I think, had kind of an eye on that 80 Olympics that got trashed when Russia and the U.S. continued their bickering and Cold War, and we protested and didn't go to theirs, and then they didn't go to ours. So, that died there right about 1980.
All right, now you get to UCLA. After you've been there a couple of years, you get a new head coach by the name of Dick Vermeil. What were your first thoughts of Coach Vermeil when he got there, and what was it like to play for him?
It was one of the best things that ever happened to me, I think, getting Dick and that staff, so much of the staff that he kept, and some of the guys he brought in. I had Terry Donahue all 4 years there. as my offensive line coach. But, Dick Vermeil was to put it lightly, a real believer in hard work. And, you didn't have a specific number of plays or a specific time you were going to be out there. You were going to be out there until you did it right. And, I think he honed a lot of his skills and reputation on us those first couple of years as a head coach.
All right. Now, the highlight of your time, I would think, would have been 1976. You guys pulled a huge upset against Woody Hayes and Ohio State. I think they were ranked number 1. And a lot of people forget that they beat you guys like 41-20 in California, like the second or third week of the season.
Yeah, in the Coliseum, where people also forget that UCLA used to play there. In the Coliseum, they beat us pretty handily. So we played them again later. We were a gigantic underdog. And, I don't blame them. They had, I don't know how many All-Americans on their team. We had a couple, but nothing like they did. They had Archie Griffin, a 2-time Heisman Trophy winner. But, we were a lot better the second time than we had been the first. And it was a team that just did get better and better as the year went on. And one of the more masterful jobs of coaching I think that Dick Vermeil ever did was getting that team ready for that Rose Bowl and convincing them about how much better we were, and, that us against the world, all that cliche stuff. That's cliches until it works. And in this case, it worked. Yeah.
And, I mean, if I remember right, you guys beat them by like 2 touchdowns, too. It wasn't like it was a real close game in the fourth quarter either.
Yeah, I'm going to say it was like, 23-10 or 26-13, something like that.
Yeah, I think it was 23-10. Actually, it's the first Rose Bowl I remember watching. And I'm from Indiana, so I hated Ohio State, so I was cheering for UCLA.
Well, good.
That and I liked the blue uniforms. So I was like 8. It didn't take much to impress me. But all right, you were drafted by the 49ers in 1976. What were your first thoughts about going to San Francisco?
Well, initially I had been called later in the first round by the Cleveland Browns. There was a line coach there at the time by the name of Rod Humanick, who had been a head coach at Cal State Northridge. And I'd known him from some football camps and other games and all-star games and whatnot I had played in. And he calls up and, he says, Randy, Rod Humanick, what do you think of playing for the Cleveland Browns? We're coming up here in the first round. And like a dummy at that age, I said, like, Cleveland, like in Ohio?
A lot colder up there, too.
Well, yeah. I said, snows a lot up there, doesn't it? And I think that was the end of our conversation. You get the idea. I might be a California guy.
All right. You got there, and you played for some great coaches, to Bill Walsh's, to Dick Vermeil's, but a couple of guys that you played for that people may not remember, Bob McKittrick, and I think Howard Mudd was your first offensive line coach at San Francisco, too, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, I had a few. When I first got there, Monty Clark was the head coach. He had been the line coach for those great Miami Dolphin teams.
Yeah.
And he hired Dick Enright, who was the head coach at Oregon, and he was our line coach. And Monty was out after the first year, and then I had Kenny Meyer my next year, and then he was out after the second year. Then my third year we had Pete McCulley, and we had 2 coaches that year because Pete got fired after the 8th or 9th game. And that was a year, I believe, that last year was the year that Howard was there, and then Howard got held over by Bill Walsh, and he and McKittrick did some work with us. And I mean, having guys like he and McKittrick for a brief time, Mike White, the old Cal coach, and NFL assistant coach for a long time. He was one of our line coaches, but Howard Mudd and McKittrick were so much like what I had at UCLA with Terry Donahue, in that, huge believers in hitting the Crowder sled, huge believers in technique, and huge believers in all the things that, that God didn't give you, things that you had to learn. And I owe a lot to, Donahue and Howard and Bob McKittrick.
Yeah, I've had, over the last month, I've had Jim McNally, the old Bengals line coach, and Jim Hannafin, two of the best offensive line coaches ever. And when they talk about other offensive line coaches, Howard Mudd and Bob McKittrick are two of the guys that come up right away from them.
Yeah, they're unbelievable.
All right, also, 1979, you guys, I think 76, under Monty Clark, you guys were pretty good. I mean, you went 8-6, then you ran upon some rough times, and then you got a coach from Stanford by the name of Bill Walsh. You want to tell us first impressions on Coach Walsh and then what he did to change the culture of the team?
Well, Coach Bill was really, let's say, confident. He never lacked confidence in himself, that's for sure. And he made it very, very clear. In fact, our first sort of team meeting at training camp, he made a speech where he got up in front of the team and said, I know what some of you are thinking. Some of you are sitting here saying, I've been here 4 years. I've been here 5 years. I've been here through 5, 6 head coaches. I'll just outlast this one. This guy will just be the 7th. He took a pause and looked around and said, you know what? You were 2-14 last year. You were the worst team in the league. If you can't play here, where the hell can you play? It was greeted by dead silence and milked it for all it was worth. Made quite an impression. And, they went through a lot of bodies in 79 and 80 in training camp. And, I don't think he probably, between those 2 years, he probably never had a harder year on him personally than those 2 years. Because we were 2-14 again his first year, and then we were 6-10. And the frustrating thing about being that 6-10 team with him was our offense was one of the best in the league, but our defense just couldn't stop anybody, and it drove him nuts. And obviously he addressed it in that next draft, but
especially with the defensive back.
He never let that happen again.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about 1981. The Niners have been down for a while. When did you realize during that season that this team was something different than the others, that this one was special?
Probably a combination of going back to Washington and meeting, Joe Gibbs and the Redskins there and beating the Cowboys at home pretty soundly. Even though, they weren't the real Cowboys that showed up, we were told repeatedly. It was a combination of those games. That season we finished 16-3, but we started 1-2. So the first 3 games were almost a reproduction of what we had done in 1980. We played good, but not good enough. But everything kind of clicked starting with that Washington game.
Now, what do you think really changed with the Washington game?
A lot of it was faith. A lot of it, I can't lie, was defense. We had guys flying around. Carlton Williamson and Ronnie Lott and Dwight Hicks and Eric Wright and our linebackers. I mean, they were setting the tone. Big time. We go to Pittsburgh and they knocked John Stallworth out of the game. He had like a punctured lung. That I think really gave that team an identity within the locker room, was the physical nature of that defense. Now, later sort of the identity of that team would be the offense, but I think really one of the heart and souls, or the most basic part of that team that made the hugest difference, was that defense really asserting itself.
Yeah, and if you look at that 81 team, that was more of a defensive team than an offensive team, which I don't think people realize, because I don't think you guys had a rusher over 400 yards that year offensively.
Oh, no, Ricky Patton, I think, was our leading rusher, or Lenville Elliott.
One of those guys, Bill Ring. It was basically running back by committee, wasn't it?
Yeah, we didn't run the ball a whole hell of a lot. We ran it effectively, but that was the very sort of genesis, the birth of the whole run as the pass, or pass as the run.
Yeah, it's the West Coast offense. You throw a bunch of short passes instead of just handing the ball off.
Yeah.
But and you look at it, 1981, when I think you guys beat the Cowboys like 45-14 that year. But when you played their real team, you still beat them in the championship game. What was that day like for you, and playing in one of the greatest conference championship games ever played?
Yeah, it was pretty surreal. Besides the fact that the build up to it was, I think it was kind of bizarre because the area had such an inferiority complex, the whole Bay Area. Niners side of it did, at least, because the Raiders had, they won a Super Bowl in 77 and then won one again in 80, and, they were really the measuring stick in a lot of ways for many, many parts of the league, especially in California. And, we just were reminded time after time that week how many times the Niners had gotten in this position and screwed up, and gotten in this position and not done it. And one of the things that people forget about that game is the number of turnovers in that game. And there were a bunch. And we were moving the ball, but we turned it over. And they were moving the ball, and they turned it over. But it's all remembered from what went on basically in that fourth quarter, and it was an all-timer.
Yeah, one of the great finishes in NFL history. I think people forget the plays that the 49ers defense had to make even at the end of that game because the Cowboys.
Yeah, I mean, Eric Wright would get a flag on him today for the way he horse-collared Drew Pearson down.
Yeah, but if he misses Pearson may score there or at least get in field goal range.
Yeah, no, it's a touchdown.
Now, you end up being a 49er. All right, you go to the Super Bowl, you think it's going to be sunny, and you end up with your first Super Bowl experience in Detroit, Michigan, or Pontiac at the Silverdome.
Right.
What do you remember about that week leading up to the Super Bowl?
Ice and snow and cold and trapped would be the word I'd use to describe. Bill Walsh did a fantastic job of kind of keeping everybody loose. But, talking about cabin fever, it's cold as heck. You can't really spend too much time outside. I mean, except that some parts of the week it's like 20 below. So, the highlight of the week was either going out to dinner and having a few drinks, a few beers or something. And then, some parts of the week we had old empty parking lots and we'd do donuts on the ice. It was kind of a strange. Actually, all three of my Super Bowls were strange experiences, but that one for sure was one that was unnecessarily close as a game because we got ahead 20-0 in the first half. So it should have been a pretty fait accompli, but they did a good job of coming back.
Well, I still think that game should have been played outdoors in Detroit, but
yeah.
Would have given us a better chance. But
just like that wonderful AFC Championship game against the Chargers, right?
Yes, that's the way football was meant to be played. 60 below and everybody about to die from how cold it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, but I had Ed White on, who was a great Charger, and he tried to give me crap about that, how they'd have beat the Bengals if they'd have played in San Diego or it had been 80 degrees. But I had to bring up the fact that the Bengals played in November in San Diego and beat them worse than what they beat them here when it was 60 below. So I don't think that was that great.
Yeah, that was a really good Bengals team. People tend to forget about some of those teams that lost games. But they were really good.
The thing that killed it there was the end of that first half with the two bouncing kickoffs, and they give away 6 points in the last 20 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And in the goal line stand. But we don't need to talk about this anymore, Randy. Let's go on. Now, 82, you had the strike season. You want to talk a little bit about the strike season? I know the Niners ended up going, 3-6, missing the playoffs?
What a nightmare. That was a nightmare. That was probably one of the lowlights of my career, without a doubt, because, we kind of self-destructed. Having the success we had, we had a handful of guys that got off that plane from the Silverdome, from the Super Bowl, and hell, we didn't even see them again. They kind of dropped off the face of the earth. I think everybody had so much fun and kind of, believed a lot of the press clippings, might be a nice way of putting it.
Yeah. And
it came back to really, really haunt us. And I think it's something that, Bill Walsh took real note of and kind of never let that kind of mentality creep back into that organization again.
Yeah, and then you guys turn it around, 1983, you go to the championship game. Still think you guys got completely hosed in that game.
Oh, there's no doubt.
Oh, yeah, you guys were down, 21-0 or something at one point? Almost came back, won the game. There was some very, let's say, questionable calls. But then you moved to 1984. Team goes 15-1.
I don't think we were supposed to win that game, but it was actually.
I don't think you were supposed to. No, they wanted the Raiders against the Redskins in that game.
It was a gift in disguise, though. It very much was a gift in disguise because it served as the impetus to what we did the next year. Yeah, and as you said, the next year, I think you guys were, if not the most complete team I ever saw, you were dang close. I mean, you had a running game with Wendell Tyler then. I think that was Roger's first year there too, wasn't it? Yeah, well, that's back when Roger was the fullback. Yeah, but you had him, you had Wendell Tyler. I mean, that was one of the great teams. I think you guys went 15-1, and your loss, I think, was by 3 points. You want to talk a little bit about? We were the first team to go 18-1. Yeah, and you were very dominant in the playoffs, especially the 23-0 beatdown you gave it the Bears. But you want to talk a little bit about that season? It was, probably the most fun. Yeah, winning's always the most fun in the game. And when you win like that, you get into this kind of what I've always referred to as next mode. And you get done with the game, and it's just who's next. And Bill Walsh was a big fan of boxing. And, his whole analogy in football was always that, your opponent wasn't necessarily on that day, that it wasn't a team, it was an object. It wasn't a person. It was just a thing. And you had to execute against them. And, it was an ends to a means. And we'd walk out there, and it wasn't, God, you worry about, we got to do this, and win. Most of the time, we were going out there with the idea of, wow, do we win by 30 or 40? Or, it was crazy. At times, it wasn't fair because the defense was so good that the other team couldn't afford really not to score. They couldn't afford not to sort of play catch-up with us because there was no way they were going to come back on that defense. Yeah, which makes your defense even better because the other team's forcing everything because they feel like they have to score every time they get the ball. Yeah, and, the playoffs went well. That's the genesis of the old, Perry and him at fullback because Guy McIntyre played some fullback in that game, and Ditka didn't like it. And best thing that ever happened to William Perry was that game kind of redefined his role with the Bears. But yeah, we beat them in that game, and Miami still I believe they were like 16 or 15-2 going into that game. Yeah, they started that year out like 10-0 or 11-0 before they even lost. Yeah, they were 15-2. We'd only lost once, but you sure couldn't tell. The fact that it's in our backyard, it was at Stanford, so whatever anybody ever says about never having a home Super Bowl game, they're wrong. And I don't wish it on anybody if that ever happens to somebody because, you think going to a Super Bowl is a crazy experience for an organization. Try doing it in your backyard. I don't advise it. Let's put it that way. But all we heard for 2 weeks was about Dan Marino and that offense and the killer bees on the defense and all this. And by the time that 2-week period was up, I think we'd heard just about enough of that. And I really believe that's one of the reasons we played as well as we did. Yeah, I think you guys were a far superior team. The NFC was far superior to the AFC back then, too. Yeah, I think it was a much more physical, though, people are loath to use that term physical when it came to San Francisco. The NFC in general was a very physical conference. And they had the highlights. They had the video game numbers. And they had the Elways and the Marinos and the throwers and all that fun stuff. Yeah, that was just
a great football. Like I said, the only teams I've seen that really compared to the 92 Cowboys were a real complete team, and you had the Steelers in the mid-'70s, but, I mean, that was as good as it got. We'll move to Super Bowl 23, the 1988 season, which was one of the great years of my childhood until you guys ruined it there in January of '89. But my question
you can be like everybody else in Cincinnati. Just blame it on Stanley Wilson.
Well, you know what though? I've interviewed probably 30 Bengals off that team, and almost every one of them says you don't know how big a deal it was to lose Stanley Wilson.
Right.
Because he was the guy that when the offense and defensive coordinators would start fighting with each other would tell them both to shut up. And there was a lot of dissension during that game, I guess, with the play calling and everything from what I've heard. But, I mean, let's face it, you got to make the plays. Lewis Billups drops the ball,
Yep.
You guys drive the ball 92 yards in, 3 minutes and 32 seconds. But before we get to that, I know you're a warm weather guy. I remember the answer you had for the Cleveland question. The game that most impressed me about the 80s Niners was the 1988 championship game in Bears weather, where you guys went up there in Bears weather, as they like to talk about it, and you just beat them down like 28-3. You want to talk a little bit about that game?
No, it was a fun experience. For conference championship games, you usually have to get to town a little earlier. Most teams won't get in until Saturday, but we always traveled, if it was a distance like Chicago or New York, we'd go in Friday. So we got a full couple of days of Bear weather comments and Bear weather questions and all sorts of stuff. And it was there's a bit of an analogy from a cause and effect of, kind of like that Super Bowl against Miami, where all we ever heard about was the other team. Much like that, all we heard about was how cold it was going to be, and how the Bears never lose in this kind of weather. So, we were pretty committed to not letting that happen. And none of us wore sleeves. And we go over, they come out, and most of their guys have got long sleeves on. We're laughing, going, what is this? No, but it was cold. It was cold. I mean, it was really cold. We had a replay happen during the game. And Jim Tunney was doing the game as a referee. And it was taking forever to do the replay on a turnover. And we were on offenses on the field. And finally, Joe Montana looks at Tunney and goes, what is the deal? I mean, give him the ball. We got to do something. We're freezing out here.
Now, we go to Super Bowl 23. Couple questions. Number one, did you know it was going to be your last game going in? And number two, you played with a guy by the name of Joe Montana. You want to take it through what it was like to play with Montana in that final drive?
Yeah, and I did. Yeah, I knew it was something that had sort of been coming for a few weeks, if not for that whole year. Because you watch the tape. It's not the same. You're not playing to the level you want to play to. And no matter what people say around you or tell you, your eye is the one that knows. So, I was pretty convinced it was going to be, and then I was able to, obviously pull the trigger at a good time when it came to, deciding to walk away then. But, having a guy like Joe around doesn't hurt your decision-making process as far as can he help you do what you need to do. Unbelievable. There's not enough superlatives to go with what he could do with the ball. People talk about accuracy and arm strength, and I've got the NFL channel here on with the sound down, and they're talking about all the measurables and what the radar gun had their arm at and stuff. Yeah, it's like it's got nothing to do with actually playing the game. It's great if you want to keep a computer busy, because Joe wasn't a guy that the computer would like at all. I mean, even today, the computer wouldn't like him very much. But one of the most competitive guys I've ever met in my life, and just had that knack. When things got tighter, he got looser. As things got to the point where it would demand the most focus and concentration, he just kind of went into a whole different mode. And the best example is that whole thing about, hey, is that John Candy? It was the perfect thing to say in a huddle that was a bit uptight.
Yeah.
Basically huddled up in our end zone and having to go, at least 60 or so yards, 70 yards to kick a field goal to tie it or a touchdown to win it.
Well, it was just disappointing that he pulled that off, but
yeah. Well, my favorite NFL
you had
film,
one. You could have gave us one. Hell.
My favorite NFL film moment from that game, though, is they had Sam White. He was wired on the other sideline. And we're driving the ball down the field, and he's talking to somebody upstairs, but he's got his hand on his chin, and he's kind of shaking his head, and he goes, how many times have I seen this?
Well, hell, he saw it the year before where he screwed up the clock at the end of the game in '87 and gave you guys one play. And
oh, yeah.
Rice catches the touchdown pass because I think Walsh lined up trips on the left side and put Jerry Rice by himself, and Sam, for some reason, put a rookie Eric Thomas on him one-on-one, and that didn't turn out too well either.
Yeah, of course.
So that's why I don't like the 49ers, Randy, because you can also bring up the 1984 game when you guys were really good, and we had a 17-3 lead in San Francisco and blew that one 24-17. That's
true. I remember that one, too.
Yeah. And see, if you'd have played 90, I could bring up the game where we blew the lead and y'all beat us in overtime. But, Matt, did you just come on?
I did.
All right. Randy, this is Matt Andruscavage, who is on a different time zone than me. I told him 11 o'clock, and I screwed this up. But he's a huge Niners fan, so we'll bring him in and help finish up the interview if that's all right with you.
All right, no problem.
All righty. We just got done with those miserable Super Bowls, by the way, man.
Poor Mike.
I know, yeah. I get it. We've had all kind of 49ers on.
Two.
Hey, the good thing is the next Niner we have on, Randy's Dana Stubblefield, and he had nothing to do with those Super Bowls. So.
There you go. He just had the one against the Chargers.
Yeah, and that doesn't bother me at all. That didn't even seem like a Super Bowl. But, Matt, you want to go ahead and ask the next question?
Sure. I know that you guys had talked about, first of all, Randy, thanks so much for coming on, and I apologize for not getting on sooner. A little bit of a mix-up with the time zone, but I'm definitely a huge fan of yours and your career, and appreciate all you did for the Niners.
Sure, no problem at
all. So you guys already talked about Super Bowl 16?
Super Bowl 16 and 23. So if you're looking on the question thing, we'd be at like number 15.
Okay. Well, one thing I wanted to know, before or after the 1983 season, you guys had the loss to the Redskins in the championship game, and I know that that loss fueled the 1984 season. What was the 1984 season like for you?
Well, I mean, not to sort of undersell it, but
about as close to perfect as it could be. You obviously when you lose a game like we did against the Steelers, at the time it hurt, but you didn't have it in the context of what that probably could have meant down the road from a historical standpoint. It wasn't a perfect season, but that was one of the more perfect teams I think the league has seen. So it was an honor to be a member of that team, and when it came to that championship game in '83, I mean that had everything to do with a chip on that team's shoulder.
No question about it. That was definitely one of the best teams I've ever watched.
Yeah.
All right. Go ahead.
No, it was fun. Yeah, we talked a little bit about it earlier, but it was a team that had pretty much a little bit of everything. It was also about as close as any of the teams that I played on.
All right, so we talked about Super Bowl 23 was your final game. When did you know you wanted to go into broadcasting? Was that something that happened earlier?
Well, I started. Yeah, I mean, I started doing doing radio back in '83, and then I started doing like a call-in show on Monday nights on KCBS in San Francisco, and I loved that, and that sort of turned into also doing a TV show. So I started doing both those things, and I was pretty persistent when it came to a lot of that. So when it came time for, I don't know if you guys remember the USFL coming into being, but I had a great opportunity to do Oakland Invader games, because back then I think ABC had the contract, but in every individual market there had to be a station designated that broadcast the games regardless. So in the San Francisco market, it was Channel 2, which was, I believe it was independent then. Now it's Fox. But we did the games. I did it with Barry Tompkins was the play-by-play.
Dale boxing announcer too.
Yeah. And I was the analyst, and it was fun. We did games. In fact, I was talking to Steve Spurrier at the College Football Hall of Fame function a couple of weeks ago, and reminded him of doing one of his Tampa Bay, was it the Tampa Bay Storm or something like that?
Bandits.
Yeah, the Bandits. Yeah, that team he had there, and Rick Neuheisel was with the San Antonio Gunslingers. Did that year. But it was a great experience. So, I would send basically an audition tape or a resume tape to the networks every year, starting in about 84, 85, of all the stuff I had done. So when it did come time to retire, it just seemed like kind of the next natural thing to do.
When you got started with broadcasting, and then as you progressed on, who's your favorite to work a game with?
Well, I worked with, I can say that I've worked with some of the best ever. Wouldn't be a stretch. I mean, from, Nance and Stockton and Enberg, and just keep going down a list. I had an awful lot of fun the one year I was able to work with Jim Nance. Before I would spend the next 3 years or so at the NFL Today doing that. Worked with him. Dick Enberg was probably the most educational time. I worked with Charlie Jones for a good handful of years. He was fantastic. But getting a chance to work with Enberg, being an LA kid, and I mean he was doing the California Angels and all that back then, and he did UCLA stuff, and his voice to me growing up, it was Chick Hearn, and him and Vin Scully were the guys you thought of when you thought of sports.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I get the Major League Baseball package just to listen to or see the Dodger games with Vin Scully calling them, and I think Dick Enberg does the Padres games now.
Yeah, he does.
But yeah, so I'll just sit here at night and fall asleep listening to that. But are you doing the Patriots preseason games with Don Criqui again this year?
No, not anymore. That ended a couple of years ago.
Okay.
No, that was a lot of fun. Did it for about 10 years.
So what's it like to deal with Bill Belichick?
Well, I think when you do the preseason, it's a whole different type of deal. And, I've known Bill for a while. I've known Bill back when he was a defensive coordinator or linebacker coach with the New York Giants, seeing him at various off-season type functions and whatnot. So, I never had much of a hard time dealing with him. But, I'm like everybody else. Once Bill gets into football mode, once he sort of puts that screen down, forget about it.
Well, I had another question for you. Obviously, playing with Joe Montana for most of your career, especially with the Patriots coming up here. What's your take on the Tom Brady Joe Montana debate?
I think it's good sort of cannon fodder. It's good, talk show debate type stuff. It's different eras. It's a different kind of football. But I believe it's if you're trying to make the point from Brady's side, you would have numbers as far as yards and touchdowns and all that. But it's kind of hard to overcome the 4-0 thing that Joe's got going on personally.
All right, so my question is this, because actually me and Matt and another guy did a show about this. So my question is this. This is what I never understood. So it's better to be 4-0 in the Super Bowls than it is to be 4-2 and have made it to 6?
Yeah, I think it's better to be 4-0. Be better to be 6-0. Ask Brady that. I'm sure he'd love to have both those games back against the Giants.
Well, I'm sure he would, but it still seems like it would be better to go to 6 than it would be to 4, even though he lost 2.
Well,
but I don't know. We always have this.
Yeah.
To me, they're
no,
1 and 1A. There's not much difference between the two of them.
It's also a different NFL.
Yeah,
that's one thing that people really don't take into effect when you start talking about. Plus everybody's got amnesia once it goes further back than your point of reference of watching as a kid to great players, and what other so-called great players did at other times. I mean, Brady's done some remarkable stuff, but and Montana and other quarterbacks in other eras. But you look at what a guy like Graham did, with Cleveland in that whole decade.
Yep.
That was stupid.
10 championship games, won 7 of them.
Yeah, it was ridiculous.
Yep, exactly.
So, but that's again a different NFL, different game.
All right. Well, Matt, you got any final questions? We got you in here a little late, so if you want to go on for a little bit, you're more than welcome.
No, I won't take up any more of his time. I appreciate you coming by, and I wish I could have been on sooner. Didn't know the time.
No problem.
Mike told me the wrong time, but
hey,
that's
I
all
texted
good.
you at 11:02 and asked you where you were, man.
I did not
same
get that
text I sent to Randy.
We'll have to figure that out what happened there, but that's all good. I'm just glad I was able to get on and at least be able to talk to you for a little bit. A big fan of yours, your career,
no problem,
and appreciate you coming by.
Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah, I enjoy some of your stuff on you guys' stuff on Twitter with the best of this and the best of that.
Yeah, well, we appreciate
a lot of
you
fun to
retweeting
keep
it
track.
too.
Hey, I'll tell you what. You bring up a great point that people, you don't have to be a historian, but if you got this thing called Google, I tell people quite often when they talk about great players, I say, okay, just Google Sammy Baugh.
Right.
And look at what he did some of the years he was in the league. Oh, yeah, well, there was – I said, no. Just look at his stats and look. Oh, he's a quarterback. Well, yeah, it's one of the things he did. He led the league.
He also led the league in
punting average.
And
well, it's just like I had a guy on like 6 weeks ago. His name was Eddie Metter. You remember Eddie?
Yeah.
Okay, Eddie was on the all-decade team in the 60s, still holds like 6 Rams records. And, I mean, when I'm telling people who's going to be on my show, I'm all excited about it. And they're all like, who's that? Was he the singer of Pearl Jam? And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're right. Yeah, it was in L.A.
And then the same thing with Ball.
I'm very well Eddie Metter and Dick Bass.
Yeah, and the picture I put up on the Sammy Ball article has him throwing a jump pass. And I'm getting all kind of people sending me all these messages on the social media they'll post on there. Well, if he threw the ball like that, he wasn't a real quarterback. You look at his stats, he was a real quarterback. He was probably the first real quarterback.
Well, and plus what they did, they all had to play defense.
Yeah. But
it's just too bad that people forget, like you were saying. People just get amnesia. They don't do their due diligence. They just look at what they remember from like maybe the last 2 or 3 years and dismiss so many other players. It's too bad.
Yeah.
Well, luckily for me, I don't remember the last 2 or 3 years very well, but I can remember everything before 1990.
There you go.
But I want to thank Randy Cross for coming on again. I want to remind everybody to go check out thegruelingtruth.net, check out all the articles, all the shows. The rest of the week, our lineup is former San Francisco 49er Pro Bowl defensive lineman Dana Stubblefield, former Pittsburgh Steeler wide receiver Ernie Mills. Matt, you got any final words?
No, just a very, very much appreciation to Randy for coming on and for your career.
No problem. It was my pleasure.
Well, thanks a lot, Randy. We'd love to have you on anytime.
All right, guys. Thank you.
All right. Thanks
Bye-bye.
a lot. Hey, so remember to check us out on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker. Check out thegruelingtruth.net. So for Matt Andruscavage, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.